Okay, so hi everybody. Thanks for joining us today. My name is Adriana Bankston. I'm the CEO and managing publisher for the Journal of Science Policy and Governance. And I want to welcome you all here today for a webinar leading up to the submission deadline for our summer standard issue in partnership with the AAAS STPF program. So I want to just give you a brief background on the journal for those that may not be familiar with what we do. So we are internationally recognized open access and peer-reviewed publication. We were established 10 years ago by senior leaders and young scholars in science and technology policy. And our mission is to catalyze the engagement of students and early career researchers in science policy and governance debates through policy research and writing. We publish policy papers from students, postdocs, policy fellows, and early career researchers in science policy. And in addition, we bolster research and writing credentials for early career scholars in science policy and encourage them to engage in policy discourse and debate and to contribute to policymaking at all levels of government. We publish a number of different formats. So you can see here, op-eds, technology assessments, policy memos, analyses, white papers, book reviews, workshop proceedings, and other research articles that cover every corner of science and technology policy. You can see a number of different topics here. We also promote publications through our global mailing list, as well as events such as workshops, webinars, and a podcast where we interview published authors. You can follow us on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram, and I'll share our channels as well as our YouTube channel where we post all of our recordings and today's as well. So I'll share that later. In terms of what we publish, so we have two different types of issues: standard issues that are open calls for submissions for articles of all formats covering any corner of science and technology policy, and special topics that are sponsored by a partner organization. Actually, both types can be sponsored, and also these are more focused in scope or topic. And as I mentioned, we focus exclusively on early career, so current students, postdocs, policy fellows within 5 years of their last degree, as well as early career professionals. And I'll share the link to our submissions in a little bit. In addition to publishing, we also offer opportunities in terms of webinars and writing workshops, as I said, leading up to our submission deadlines. And for the past couple of years, we collaborated with UC Irvine's GPS STEM program on a virtual certificate program for science policy and advocacy. Hopefully applications will open again later this year. So that's a great way to learn some communication and submit to the journal also from that. We also have the editorial board, which is another great opportunity to engage associate editors, also early career. That's a great way to learn about different areas of policy by reading and editing publications. And our call for applications will be open again in the summer. And we also offer opportunities for published authors. So hopefully that's an incentive for you all that we do try to elevate publications after they're in the journal. Through various avenues. So our authors have presented, for example, their papers at a British embassy. So you can see this left tweet here from a special issue on climate change solutions sponsored by the UK Science and Innovation Network. We also submit a number of conferences, panels to conferences for authors to submit. We've done a number of different sessions at SACNIS and other places. And then we also have a podcast where we interview authors, as you can see here again, just as an example from environmental policies. And then finally, we work on media engagement and trying to sort of digest the publications into other formats. This is an article from Northwestern, just as an example, highlighting students who published in the journal. And we're also looking for other outlets. Again, universities are a great way to do this, but also trying to highlight this work more broadly. So on to the event today. So as I said, JSPG partnered with the AAAS Science and Technology Fellowships Program. And we are piloting these standard issue events this year. So we previously held a writing workshop for this issue. This is our webinar focused on careers. And before going into the panel and the panelists and introductions, I want to just give Jessica Soul the opportunity to say a few words about the program.
Thank you, Adriana. And hi, everyone. Thank you for being here today. Like she said, I'm Jessica Soul. I'm the recruitment director for the AAAS Science and Technology Policy Fellowships Program. And STPF is really proud to be partnering with JSPG this year on the summer standard issue. We're looking forward to seeing the issue and all the articles that get included. And we recognize JSPG's importance and their role in the science policy community for all the reasons Adriana was just sharing. They're creating opportunities for early career researchers to contribute to policy and take on leadership roles. And when I think about this session, this September, STPF is welcoming its 50th class of fellows. It's a big anniversary milestone for us. It's kind of huge. There's now nearly 4,000 alumni worldwide, and they've had this lasting impact on science policy. And then I think about each of these individual fellows, and they've all had their own entry point into science policy. Their journey all started somewhere. And so today you're going to be hearing from 3 of these alumni, Ivory, Esteban, and Cleo. And I hope that our moderator will also be chiming in and sharing. But so during this conversation, you'll hear the many ways to get involved in policy, not just STPF, although our applications open June 1st, but you're going to hear about state level fellowships, science policy groups on campus, volunteering with JSPG, working with other science societies, and so much more. And so I'm just really grateful you're all here with us today. You're taking time out of your Friday to spend with us, and you're here for a reason. So please ask your questions. Please reach out to us if we don't get to your question. We want the session to be as valuable for you as possible. And so thank you all again, and I'll hand it back over to the JSPG team.
Great, thank you, Jessica. We're really happy to work with you all as well, and excited to see the submissions for the issue. So with that introduction, let's move on to the event today. So just a few logistics. Please mute your microphone and turn off your video so we can focus on the panelists today. And feel free to ask questions during the discussion in the chat for our speakers. You can send directly to me or to our moderator through the chat. So for some background, as I said, this webinar is one of 2 leading up to the submission deadline, featuring former STPF fellows from 3 different sectors who will describe their careers in the field. And we have a distinguished panel here today, and I'm really grateful for their participation, and would like to just briefly introduce them before I hand it over to the moderator. So Cleo Chou is a climate policy and the program specialist in natural climate solutions at USAID. Then we have Ivory Dean, who is a science program manager at the Chan Zuckerberg Initiative, and Esteban Santana, who is a senior manager for state public policy at Genentech. And with that, I'd like to introduce our moderator for today. Ben Wolfson is JSPG's assistant editor-in-chief for Standard Edition, and he is a current fellow supporting the Basic Research Office in the Department of Defense. He was previously a postdoc at NCI. During this time, he ran and edited the blog for the NIH Fellows Science Policy Discussion Group. Ben earned his PhD in molecular medicine with a focus in cancer biology from University of Maryland, Baltimore. And more broadly, in terms of policy, Ben is interested in scientific freedom and policies that promote scientific innovation and the translation of basic science into novel technologies to better society. And with that, I'll turn it over to Ben to take it away.
Yeah, thank you, Adriana, and welcome to all of you. Thanks for joining us today. So as Adriana said, I am a first-year AAAS fellow right now, and I got my, I started my science policy journal or science policy career basically with the journal. I started as an associate editor in 2016, and I've had the privilege of working with the journal and with the different editors since then. And so it's a real privilege to be here to talk about how everybody else has progressed in their careers and how they've kind of started in science policy and where they are now. And so I want to give a bit more of an in-depth bio for our panelists before we start. So Cleo was, she was a 2018 to 2020 Executive Branch Fellow in STPF at USAID. And prior to that, she completed a PhD and a postdoc at Princeton, where she studied tropical forest carbon sink using field-based and mathematical modeling approaches. Ivory Dean was a 2018 to 2020 Executive Branch Fellow at NSF and USAID. And she got her PhD as a cancer biologist from Wayne State University, and previously was a chemist with a BS from Xavier University in Louisiana. She focuses in grounding the STEM fields in diversity, equity, accessibility, and inclusion. Finally, we have Esteban Santana. Esteban was a 2016 to 2018 Executive Branch Fellow at the NIH. He is a microbiologist by training and has worked both at the state and federal levels at the Biopharmaceutical Trade Association and private industry, all focusing on research and healthcare issues. And now he's at Genentech. And so I just want to start off by asking the panelists to introduce themselves and kind of highlight their current positions and experience in science policy. How did you get to where you are, and what are the elements that you use most in your day-to-day? And why don't we start with Esteban?
Sure. Thanks, Ben. And thanks for the invitation to come and speak with you all. So how did I get my start? So I graduated in 2014 from Ohio State. And then I did fellowships, honestly. I did a state level fellowship, CCST, California Council on Science and Technology, where I worked in the state legislature. And I did that for about 1.5 years. The fellowship is 1 year, and I stayed on just as an employee. And then I came to do AAAS because I was certainly looking to get some experience in Washington, D.C. And that's where I was at the NIH. And that really, I got to say, both experiences, but certainly my time at the NIH really set me up for my career and gave me the training that I need. I always say, like, I learned direct skills that I did not have while I was at the NIH in my placement that definitely were useful and was a factor in me getting my real job, my next job outside of the NIH. And, it might sound simple, but honestly, it was committee management. I had never done that before. And so it's oftentimes how policies come to consensus is there's committees. And managing that process, trying to come to consensus, relationship building, all of those factors to get folks to agree was a skill that I was able to learn and hone while at the NIH and the AAAS fellowship. And it definitely set me up when I went to my next career or my next job in the trade association, which is essentially what we do, policy by work group. So I have to say I enjoyed my time, and it was a great experience that gave me the skills that I needed.
Yeah, that's definitely something I quickly realized myself in my office was, consensus building. Cleo, how about you?
Yeah, so just thank you for having me today. And I'm always really inspired when I get a chance to interact with early career scientists who are interested in policy. I will say that although I went straight to my PhD after undergrad, I think I always kind of gravitated towards science policy. So I always had my eye out for opportunities. And I think one of my first big breaks was through the Ecological Society of America. There's a graduate student policy award, which I applied for and was lucky to receive. And basically, the society brought a couple of grad students to DC for a couple of days, and we did congressional visits. So we explained to our representatives why it was important to fund science and how science impacts everyone in the states that they were representing. And we also saw a career panel, not too unlike this one, where I heard from several ecologists who were working in the government at different agencies. So it really opened my eyes to what types of jobs you can have beyond being in academia. And then, of course, I think the most influential pivotal moment for me was the AAAS Science Technology Policy Fellowship. Kind of like what Esteban was saying, I just learned so many practical skills. So like budget, teamwork, project management, how to communicate with leadership, but also how to manage contractors. And it was really nice to do this in the context of a really supportive fellowship that is specifically designed for people who have mostly been in academia and who have very strong skills in science, but maybe have not had a chance to develop some of these other skills. And And another thing that I really appreciate about the AAAS Fellowship is just the network of other really cool scientists who are interested in policy. So Ivory and I actually were at USAID at the same time, but we have different scientific backgrounds. And you just get to network and learn from all the other fellows about their different experiences in government. Yeah, thanks.
Yeah, I think if anybody has a chance to interact with the Hill as a grad student or postdoc, it's really worthwhile. I had, as Adriana said, I did my PhD in Baltimore, and so I had proximity. It's great that you were able to get out there, Cleo, from a bit farther away. But I think probably now, in the age of Zoom, in kind of pandemic, post-pandemic, it's probably even more accessible than ever, and it's a really worthwhile experience. Ivory, can you tell us a bit about your background? You're on mute.
Of course I am. So just a little bit about me. Like it was said earlier, I got my bachelor's in chemistry at Xavier University of Louisiana. So I'm a proud graduate of a historically Black college. And then I went on to get my PhD at Wayne State. When I was in grad school, I figured out pretty quickly that lab work was not for me. And that's for some people who enter the AAAS Fellowship or, or interested in science policy, that's kind of like a typical narrative. And so I just realized early on that I wanted to, I love science and I love talking about science, but I really did not like being at the bench. And so I knew about the AAAS Fellowship very early on, but of course I was too early to, apply because you need a PhD or master's in engineering. So I got through my PhD, but during that time, not really, I didn't really center any of my activities around like science policy or what made me more attractive to the fellowship, but I just did things that were like of genuine interest. For example, I wanted to do some philanthropy work. And so I organized a medical mission to Haiti. And so I did that. I partnered with some medical students and we were able to get that done for 3 years in a row. And but then ultimately I had to focus on graduating. And so and that's not really, the medical mission is not really policy specific, but it really actually tied into my placement at USAID, because at USAID I was in the Office of HIV/AIDS and doing global health. So unbeknownst to me, I just doing things I was interested in, it kind of just like merged together later on. And then once I did my postdoctoral fellowship at University of California, San Francisco. And there they actually have a science policy group for students and postdocs. And that's where I got more active into science policy and really thinking of how can I, show AAAS through my application and through my actions and activities that I'm interested in science policy. So I became a co-leader of the science policy group and organized different activities and workshops and speaker engagements through them. And I'll stop there because I'm pretty long-winded. I'll keep going and maybe I'll talk about some more stuff as we get to the questions.
Yeah, thank you. So a really great thing about the panel that we have today is just a diversity of experience and a diversity of where you guys are now. So, Ivory, you're at a nonprofit. Esteban, you have both state and federal fellowship experience and now are in industry, and Cleo, you're still with the government. So Ivory, can you just talk to us a bit about what the nonprofit world is like, both, Chan Zuckerberg initiative, but also more generally, what brought you to an NGO or nonprofit, and what skills that took you there?
Mm-hmm. So I'll say this, you don't have to know what kind of job you want to do. Because when I went into it, I really didn't know what type of job I wanted at the end of the fellowship, or, what it would look like, what the day-to-day would be. But like in grad school, like as a postdoc, I just continued to do things that were of genuine interest to me, even though they seemed all over the place. But in my head, I knew they all like merged together. So I'll say that as a AAAS fellow, when I was at USAID, I, really learned how, just, and I when I was at National Science Foundation too, I just learned how many different parts come together, many different people in the organization come together. So, highly collaborative. And so when I got to Chan Zuckerberg Initiative, that's kind of one of the things that I learned through my fellowship and then took with me at CZI, which is even more collaborative. So I think that, that collaborative atmosphere and environment is very different from, working in a lab, because yes, we're collaborative, but it's like, it's like you get together at a monthly meeting or a weekly meeting and you go through your data, and then someone says, oh, well, why don't you get with this person? And, because they do this specific technique or use this specific tool. And then you just tell them and give them the samples, but there's really no like interaction. You're not sharing a Google Doc. You're not sharing, I can email a protocol, but we're not on Google Docs together going through that protocol, So collaboration as a researcher in a lab is very different from collaboration when you're at a company and doing more like administrative work. So at CZI, what we do, we are a philanthropic organization. And so we fund grants much like the NIH, but from a philanthropic standpoint. So we do look at we do have our prioritized research fields that we like to fund. And so we have our RFAs, which is our, announcements for our grant applications. And we open them up to researchers who are doing that type of research. They apply, they get the grants, the proposals get scored, and then, after scoring, they get funded. And so, so we function much like the NIH in our grant in our funding, but like I said, from a philanthropic standpoint.
Yeah, it sounds like a very interesting place. So one of the things that I love about about the issues that we publish at JSPG, but also especially the standard issue, is how broad they are. And the breadth that can come to, sometimes people write things for a federal audience, but sometimes they write them for a state audience. And it's really great to see science policy at the state level there. And Esteban, as an alumni of a state fellowship, as well as a federal fellowship, can you talk a bit about the differences between science policy at the state level and the federal level based on your experience?
Yeah, that's interesting. I mean, I would say there are a lot of similarities. Like if you draw that Venn diagram, I will say there's going to be a lot of overlap, certainly on the processes. So I was in the legislature at the state level, and then the executive branch at the federal level. But from what I hear from my federal government affairs colleagues, it's a lot of the same, right? It's just a legislative body. It's interesting because at the federal level, there are some areas like research at the NIH, as was Ivory just said, NIH funds grants, and there are guardrails and guidelines and requirements that are put on that money, but they're broad. And so oftentimes at the federal government, there's guidelines and there's rules, but they're going to be broad and allow some flexibility. It's really down at the state level where all the nitty-gritty gets worked out, where you're going to get down in the weeds, get into the details. And that's by design, right? Like the federal government has its role and the states have their authority to govern themselves. Is it like a federated system, right? That's what we have. So I think that would be the major difference. Federal government, so the processes and the topics are probably the same. Some states even fund research on their own, right? But it's just going to be the level of detail and maybe the size of the project too. Like the federal government's going to try to take on some very big things, whereas at the state level, might be smaller, but then certainly more detail and more in the weeds.
And then, not to pick on you, but can you extrapolate out to the industry position that you're in now? Yeah, because CZI as Ivory mentioned, functions similar to a grants making organization.
Sure.
And what is Genentech like?
Yeah, just a fun fact, industry does make grants as well. I'm not in the grants function, but everyone likes to do grants. Let's just put it that way. But in my role, so right, it's industry. I'm in healthcare broadly and at a pharmaceutical company. So the work I do is going to be driven by the science, right? Like I think people forget that my industry is a little charged and people have very strong opinions about it. But at the end of the day, what we do and what I do and what I focus on is going to be driven by what our researchers are doing in the lab, where the clinical trials are, what's succeeding and what's not. It is, I think, what is true that you might have heard is like in academia, you know, you might have a lot of freedom, and you do get freedom in industry, but there are those pivotal decisions where we say, are we going to continue? Are we going to stop doing this work because we're not getting the positive results that we were hoping to get? And so that is an aspect of industry. And so that will affect my work where if you don't know in the industry, you can break it up largely into pre-market, which is FDA approval, and post-market, which is everything that happens after the FDA approves a drug. And I work in the post-market space, and anything, even the stuff that I do, will get affected by the PIVGO, the pivotal decisions that are made at the clinical level, because maybe the company's moving in a different direction, and now I need to focus on a different therapeutic area. So I think that is a unique aspect. I don't think it's negative. It's just part of the job and something to understand when you do go into industry.
That's great. Thank you. So Chloe, you did your fellowship at USAID and you remained there. What kept you there? Are you in the same office that you did your fellowship in? And can you talk a bit about your role now and how the fellowship prepared you to move on as a full professional there?
Yeah, thanks. So I did stay on. Just a little background in case we have some audience members who don't know. So USAID obviously is an agency in the executive branch of the federal government, and we are one of the largest donors in the world for projects in international development and foreign assistance. So a little bit similar to what Ivory and Estefan are talking about. We're giving out grants, but also contracts to do projects. And yes, I am actually on the same exact team that I did my fellowship on. So we work on natural climate solutions, so conserving, restoring, and managing forests, wetlands, agriculture, and other lands to reduce greenhouse gas emissions and provide many co-benefits to local and global communities. And USAID receives about $120 million a year in funding from Congress to implement natural climate solutions programs in more than 40 developing countries. And we have a new, under this administration, we have a new climate strategy to reduce our greenhouse gas, help partner countries reduce greenhouse gas emissions by 6 billion tons by 2030, conserve 100 million hectares of land, and also mobilize $150 billion in public and private finance for climate change. So I can talk a little bit about like how the day-to-day of my work is, in case that's helpful. So one of the reasons I really like working at USAID is that my day-to-day is so varied. I think I probably work on more than 20 projects at a time, but there are a mix of very fast turnaround and longer term projects. Roughly, I spend about half of my time providing technical support to our missions in partner countries. So those are kind of the offices of USAID in our developing countries. They're based at the embassies, and they have full-time permanent staff, both from the US and also from the country that we're working with. So from DC, what we usually do is help design and manage natural climate solutions programs, which often are kind of 5-year long programs. And we collaborate with private sector partners, the government, of course, NGOs, civil society. So I've been working in Ghana, Papua New Guinea, the Philippines, Madagascar, often thinking about how we can reduce tropical deforestation, increase restoration for climate benefits, but also for benefits to the farmers and local communities on the ground to adapt to climate change. Yeah, so in terms of how the fellowship prepared me for the job now, I think it was helpful to be in the job that I applied for. But some of the, I think, more useful skills include just, how to have really diplomatic conversations. So a lot of our job is meeting with host country and other counterparts from the private sector, could be universities, NGOs. So how, like Adriana mentioned, how do you collaborate and just talk to everyone in the room about, doing a really complicated project and bringing along everyone's diverse perspectives. Translating science into easily understood language for general audiences is really important. Along with that is just, how to write really clearly and concisely. So memos, emails, basically, how do you convince people that the science you're talking about is important and, the ideas you want to, fund or develop are, a good way forward for your organization. And then I think lastly, something that's relevant to this audience is we also do a lot of collaboration on policy relevant research. So we think about, how to work with research institutions to do research that we can maybe directly implement in our USAID projects, or pilot new ideas, put them out there for the global community. Thanks.
So just to follow up on one of those, I think, hot button skills that you mentioned, which is writing and communicating your science to, not necessarily a scientific audience. Is that something you had experience with in grad school or before the fellowship? How did you develop those skills?
Yeah, so practice. I thought I had experience with that. In grad school, I actually, as I was looking for, opportunities to do more policy relevant work, I had a chance to write a policy document on nuclear fusion as a low carbon energy source. So it was a very interdisciplinary effort. And, that was a good experience for me because it was something totally outside of my field. And I worked with people from, different sectors. But the document we produced was still like very technical and very long. And I find that in my work, the skill I practice the most often is just, you get 175 words or like 200 words, one page in size 16 font, and you have to communicate your clearest points. And I'm always amazed that you can actually trim so much and still, provide a convincing argument. So yeah, I think some of it is you just have to be, forced to do that every day and you'll get better. But yeah, obviously there's important policy writing at all lengths and levels. It's just the level that I'm often working at is a very concise level.
I think when people are trying to develop science policy expertise in order to get a fellowship or get a job out of a grad school or postdoc, they focus a lot on the policy and forget that science communications is a major part of it and a much more accessible part to some people. And there are so many programs out there in science communication areas that you can do as a PhD or a postdoc. Ivory, you are kind of closer to the grant side still. And I think, grant writing is something that a lot of PhDs and postdocs have. Can you kind of contrast grant writing with policy writing, and then tell us a bit about the writing that you're doing on a day-to-day and how it functions in the policy realm?
Sure. First, I wanted to say that science policy is very broad and it's not one thing. So, that was one of the things that, when I was a graduate student, I had these preconceived notions of what science policy was. When I was in high school, I either wanted to be a lawyer or a doctor, and I did speech and debate in school. And then I took AP biology and, so, I really like when I was going through college, they make you feel like you have to pick one thing. And so through grad school, I was thinking that policy would be more like being that lawyer side that I kind of wanted to, be. But once I joined the AAAS fellowship, it's very different because there's a legislative branch where you're on the Hill, and then there's the executive branch where you're at a federal agency such as the NIH. And so policy through grant making is very different from what, science policy would be on the Hill. And so with that being, CZI being a grant making institution, like we're doing that policy work through the types of research that we prioritize in funding, creating that RFA or call for applications. It gives applicants, an idea of what we're looking for. So we can, in a way, control what type of science is being funded by what type of science we want to fund. And that's just not a CZI thing, that's just any grant making entity in general. So the NIH does it, the NSF does it, USAID does it. So, really, how do you, change a landscape or, get policies or enacted? It's through money and what, you want to throw money at. So, so that's kind of how policy works on my side in philanthropy too, which is like, we have the money, this is what we want to fund. But, to that writing piece, I wanted to say that, the writing that we do is a lot of internal communications. So, that kind of like analogous to what Esteban was saying, that pre-market, post-market, well, it's that pre-policy internal communications that we do that then inform those RFAs that we submit and the grants that we end up funding. And so it's a lot of internal communications on various projects. And then I just wanted to highlight that my position is new. And one, CZI is a very new organization. It's like 5.5 years old. Like, it's a baby in this realm, but has brought in a lot of powerful heavy hitters to help, inform and grow the different programs. Because although I'm in the science program, we do have our education program and then our social justice program. So, and I provided the website, you can, for everyone to peruse to see what we do. But on that science side, well, in general as a company, and then on the science side, with my position being new, my full title is actually program manager for diversity in science. So it comes through that recognition, and out of this social justice movement, that the best science is diverse science. And then also that researchers, investigators, research institutions, grant makers, everyone has a role in making science better and more diverse. And how do we do that? And so my position was created so internally and externally, the CZI science programs can start grounding our internal science program work in diversity, and then funding external science and research and with that diversity, racial equity lens. We also, on a bigger scale, have our Belinda Stubblefield, which is our Chief Diversity Officer. I forgot her exact title, but she's the she's the heavy hitter DEI person for the whole company, who has formed a team so the whole company can really ground our work in racial equity and diversity.
Yeah, that's really great.
It's a policy thing, which
it is.
Unfortunately, demanding equal rights for all people is political, so it's a policy thing.
Yeah. Well, and so, one of my future questions was going to be, why should young people get involved in science policy? But I feel like you've answered it right there. Is there are generational shifts, and they need to be driven by young people involved in policy and involved in science, and bringing forth new ideas and more equitable ideas on how we do everything. But I want to kind of jump off of that to ask a question for the panel a bit, which is, what other skills are you using? We talked about consensus, we talked about writing. what are the other skills that the next generation, our PhD students, our postdocs that are trying to enter science policy, what do they need to develop and what do they need to bring out and be ready to jump on as they enter a science policy career? Whoever has go for it.
I can lead off. Certainly agree with everything that's been said. You need all of the like research skills and everything you learn in grad school. You can forget how to run a flow cytometer, but you need all of the other things that you would do when you're at your desk. Certainly will carry you through. Being able to teach yourself something quickly, and then become an expert on it quickly. I'm going through a project right now where nobody in my company knows something, and they're like, "Here, you figure this out, and then come tell us what to do." And I'm like, "Okay." The consensus building, but a part of that, and it's something I don't know is obvious, is like it's relationship building, and then this amorphous being able to read a room, right? Like just understanding, because at the end of the day, you want everyone to come to an agreement so you can make some change. And so being diplomatic, being able to read a room, really trying to understand what is the motivation of someone else. It's a soft skill for sure, kind of hard to like explain, and you can develop and flex the muscle. But I think that's something really important. One, in just developing policy, but then certainly if you want to move past the development of a great idea and move into implementation, which is also known as advocacy, I think those are going to be very important.
Yeah, I just want to build on everything that Esteban has said, really just emphasizing the importance of soft skills and kind of good social skills. And that's something I really appreciated about the AAAS fellowship. There were many professional development events on different topics, like how to have like a really challenging conversation when people don't see eye to eye, how to negotiate in a productive way. And another one I really didn't think about at all before I worked in government is good facilitation skills of a meeting. So you might have a meeting with like, I don't know, even 20 to like over 100 people, right? And how do you move the conversation so that it's productive and get the perspectives from as many people as you can. And then in today's world, we often have the hybrid meeting, so it's nice because you can have maybe like a Google Doc that people are providing inputs in. So even if they don't have a chance to talk, they can their voices and thoughts can be heard.
And every once in a while, you run that meeting that's perfectly on time, and everybody gets to talk, and it feels like a superpower. And
it's hard,
great.
Yeah.
I want to say I'm glad Cleo said that, because even though I didn't think about it, it's so true, because when you're thrown into these environments, people are not asking you, well, how long have you been doing this? Or they're just asking you to run a meeting. You're like, what? This is my first week. This is my first month. You're, within my first month at CZI, I'm running meetings, and I'm like, is there no like transition period? It's like, no, just like diving in. So yeah, you really have to learn those skills of facilitating a meeting, and I'm so glad to hear you say that. I would have never thought to give that advice. That's good advice. And then I think tangential to that is having great organizational skills. And I think Cleo also like mentioned that earlier, that project management skills. But really using the project management software. And so in graduate school, we're not really taught how to be organized, and we're not taught to use these different Asana and Airtable, and just depending on what office you're placed in, or where you work, people value those things differently. But even if you're in an office that doesn't value it, if you bring in that that project management, that organizational skill, they're really gonna be happy to have it. So really using those tools out there in different organizations. They all have the software. Some people use it and some people don't, so you just have to go in use it and get organized for yourself.
Yeah, I mean, we use Asana at JSPG. We used something similar in my postdoc, and it's really having those skills is really important. But I want to jump off of something that Esteban said earlier, which is talking about, being told, go learn about this thing and then tell us what it is. And when I was deciding what to do out of my postdoc, that was something that or out of my PhD even, that was something I really enjoyed doing, and just like learning about new things and then communicating it. And that's one of the things that actually like brought me to JSPG, is I wanted those chances to learn about new topics in policy and new topics in science. And as an editor, where I got to, I would be given a couple or 10 or whatever articles, and I'd have to, look at them and critique them in a field that wasn't my own. It's a skill that, as PhDs, we're taught how to learn, but you have to have critical thinking as well. And now, in the basic research office, my background's in cancer biology, and that is basically the one science that we don't talk about, is health-related sciences. And having those areas or the ability to dive into a completely new area and think critically about it, even though you don't necessarily know, years of coursework about it. And then that's also one of the great things about the standard issue, is it's broad. And so if there's an area that you're interested in and you want to write about and you want to investigate and like do a policy article, but it's not your area of expertise, this is the chance to take that time and to, write an article and submit it to something that doesn't have a direct viewpoint. But, as professionals in science policy now, what are some of the topics that you think are most need to be investigated and written about by our young early career science policy practitioners?
So topics of importance per se. I mean, I'm biased. I'm in healthcare, right? So like, I just think it's like the most important thing, your health, getting access to healthcare, and all of access. It's like a very big word. What does it mean? Is it available to you? Can you afford it? Like, there's a lot of wrapped in there, right? There could be a doctor down the street, but maybe you can't afford to go. So you don't have access in effect to that. I think a lot, anything in the healthcare realm, getting people on insurance. It's crazy that there are still a number of people that are uninsured in this country. And there are a number of reasons for that. Policy reasons, political reasons. That's just, I'm just spitballing off the top of my head, right? But I think, to me, I'm passionate about healthcare, have always been. So there's a lot to talk about in that space.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm gonna echo Esteban and just say, my bias is I'm doing DEI work. And so it's that, as a Black woman, there has never been a time I have not been doing DEI work. I'm just now getting paid for it. So I think, like I said, it's a politicized issue that shouldn't be politicized. And when I say politicized, I'm going to say, I mean, turned into a dirty word. It's okay that we have policy, we need to make good policies and rectify wrongs, but the I can't say the word, politicizing it turns it into this taboo thing where, people, then it's like, just, again, like I said, there's just, people who are fighting for equality and equity, and that shouldn't be an issue, but there are people who really make it their business to turn that narrative around into something nasty and dirty, which it's not. And, when we talk about science and policy, just all encompassing, we need to do a better job in grounding DEI in whether it's the policies, whether it's the actual research, and whether your title is actually DEI or not, we can all go into our job and, demand that, hey, even like hiring practices, why didn't you hire this person and then you chose to hire this person, so that's kind of my bias. But like I said, as a Black woman, I haven't been given an opportunity to ever think any other way, because if it wasn't fighting to be in an AP class or go to college or, get a PhD, or get a certain job. So I'm just, I don't think this should be a movement and, something that ends. I think we should continue to, make this something that is long lasting as opposed to a moment.
Yeah, I mean, 100%. Cleo, I know that's hard to follow, but do you have any topics that you would push authors to investigate?
Yeah, I was going to say, let's all reflect on everything that Ivory has said. Really important. I can just, talk in my area of, climate, just in terms of thinking, like I think right now, the role of social science for understanding behavioral change that is needed to mitigate climate change and kind of achieve new social norms in society. That's really important. Like we have a lot of work out there from researchers and also policy writers on kind of like the physical science, like the impacts of climate change and even some of the solutions. But I think some of the missing link is like, how do we think from the perspective of individuals and people and like psychology and behavior? How do we get there? Like that's the final like link I think that is missing. And along those lines, I think that a lot of people get a little bit paralyzed by all of the bad news that is out there and really scary projections on climate change. So kind of conveying to people in a digestible way, like what are actions each individual can take, whether or not you live in a developed or developing country, in a city or in a rural area, like what are simple steps you can do? I think people feel overwhelmed and not sure where they can even start.
Yeah, I've definitely been reading a lot of stuff about mitigating climate anxiety through either your own action or just focusing on what the potential solutions are. But so Cleo, Ivory, you talked earlier about being a member of a university science policy organization. What other resources were out there for you when you were trying to break into science policy, or what did you wish you had when you were doing that science policy transition?
Mm-hmm. Well, one, I wish I had those things earlier in grad school or started it myself. So if you're at an institution that doesn't have any of these things, if you can start them yourself, then, that would be a great way to, one, show that you're interested, but start something that's really important. But when I was at UCSF, I was really fortunate to be at a university that already had these things, that already had the science policy group, and our postdoc. So for the postdoctoral fellows, the University of California, the whole school system, whether it's UCSF, UC Davis, UC Irvine, Riverside, we have a postdoctoral union that is UC wide. And so it's very, postdoctoral fellows are starting to unionize in many different states and universities. The UC system has unionized postdocs, and I really wanted to get involved in the postdoctoral union, and that is part of science policy, because you are, one, I see the question with Curtis about the advocacy part. It is intertwined with advocacy. As a union, you're advocating for better pay, better health, better safety of, postdoctoral researchers. So I was involved in the postdoctoral union. There are very few graduate student unions. I know there's one in Washington State. But if you can get active and involved in trying to bring a graduate postdoctoral union to your school or postdoctoral union to your university, those type of actions are where you can be engaged and involved. So I also wanted to answer Sam's questions, because he was asking if you needed to move around. And I just want to touch on that, science policy is at all levels. It's at local level, state level, federal level. So wherever you are, you can be involved in science policy. The name may not specifically be science policy program manager, science policy managers, but the job itself is science policy. So you can't just go off of like what the title is. So you don't have to move around for the AAAS fellowship you do, because you have to move to DC. But and for the California one, like if you're actually doing a fellowship that is, you know, either state sponsored like Iowa, Illinois, California, or, you know, the federal AAAS, you do have to move to those locations. But in general, as a career, as a job, you don't have to move around.
And I just want to echo what you were saying about the union, but also being involved in student government and like the grad student government at your university. I know a lot of people that was their entrance to science policy as well. Cleo or Esteban, what resources did you build off of, or did you wish that you had that you could?
I was going to say that being invited to join this panel, I learned about the JSPG journal, and I think that it's really nice that it's focused on early career authors. And I actually shared this. A lot of my friends are now professors with their own labs, so I shared the call with them, because I think, you know, I do these career panels once in a while, and you'll always hear from the students that, you know, they want to know how to get started, and getting started is really hard, right? Like once you're already in the AAAS fellowship, that's easier. You understand, you have the connections. But yeah, I think like Ben, you were saying, like encouraging people to, you know, try out a new topic area, maybe not even what their research background is in, that could be really helpful.
And can I add that postdoctoral union, it wasn't federal, it wasn't statewide, it wasn't this big thing. It was just at my university, well, at the UC systems, you know. So and they actually hire people too. So, you know, it is a career to work for a local union or a union. So yeah, I just wanted to add that.
Esteban, were you gonna?
I think yes to everything Cleo said. I think for me, I mean, I also did student government in grad school. I did like a fly out to, you know, the Hill to like, hey, talk to your elected official. Those, you know, that was the exposure. A lot of science communication. I find that folks, when they're learning about science policy, don't really know what it is. And so it's easy to go do scientific outreach or communication. I think I meant outreach. So I did like science experiments with elementary kids, right? In the school district. So things like that. What I say is do something to get out of the lab, right? Like science policy is not in a lab. And so whatever you're doing, it needs to be in the community or facing outward, whether it's communication or something. So I think that's the most important thing. I don't think anyone needs to like have worked on a campaign or written 10 policy memos. You know, I think it's a great opportunity that JSPG offers to publish. I think that's amazing. I wasn't aware of the journal either. And so I would have been intrigued as a graduate student. And I think finding opportunities to just speak to people who have gone through it. I think my professor was very supportive, but was unclear how to help because I was his first student who wanted to enter this path. And so more avenues, and I know AAAS and other fellowships, they do webinars, like take advantage of them, opportunities to talk one-on-one with folks, I think was really helpful to me.
Yeah, and you know, I think there's never been a better time to find that than now. There's you know, an active science policy Twitter. Many AAAS current fellows and alums are active and constantly tweeting out, asking about science policy or asking about the fellowship. But building off of that, Esteban, we have an audience question. And can you comment on the importance of mentorship in your careers? And so you touched on it just now, but did you have assigned mentors, or did you seek them out based on your interest? How did that support your transition?
Yeah, I think each job I had like, or most of them had like a mentor, but it honestly, I gotta say, it wasn't until my current job that I'm effectively utilizing it. I've always I've always planned where I want to go and been aware of like what are the opportunities. And so, you know, I haven't had one or single mentors, but I talk to a lot of people. I have questions and I get nervous and I want to know, like, I want to know the answers to these questions. And so I think that's it, right? Talk to people, find out, ask questions, and that's how you learn, right? You learn something that you didn't know before, because it can be daunting. I think both of the other speakers have said there's so many things you can do in science policy, like it's so much, and that can feel overwhelming. And so I think asking questions, informational interviews, as much as you'll hear it, are so important to help you define your path. And for me, that's what acted as my mentors.
Yeah, that's, I mean, a great and true answer is the importance of informational interviews. Yeah, I see Ivory, you've plussed that up in the chat as well. But Cleo or Ivory, did you have mentors that were helped you in your transition to science policy?
I would say I kind of had a similar experience as Esteban, where my academic department was really focused on, producing new professors. There had been, a couple of former grad students who had done the AAAS, so those were a really helpful resource for me, talking to the former students from my department. But overall, I think there was just like a, overwhelming focus on research and academia. So yeah, I think just, applying for these opportunities. One thing I thought of, and for your previous question, was just what Ivory was saying, like volunteering, just getting outside. Academia is such a small world that any experience you have interacting with, a more diverse, broader group of people can really help you broaden your perspectives and understand, like what else is out there.
Yeah, and so Ivory, you've plussed up peer mentors as well, and so that was one of my favorite experiences from when I was a younger editor at JSPG and in grad school. Is I just kind of through the JSPG network met someone who was running an op-ed project where everybody wrote op-eds for local papers and traded them to edit, and like many of us got them published, and it was a really fulfilling experience. And that was with people my age and my peers. They weren't necessarily mentors from who were senior to me. Did you have really a supportive peer mentorship network or a senior mentor? What was your experience with that?
Ivory or?
Yeah, sorry, Ivory.
Oh, okay. So I think, yeah, when Cleo was talking, that hit home for me about the peer mentors, because in research, in academia, like my mentors, my graduate school mentor and my postdoctoral mentor, they were supportive, but they couldn't guide me. They couldn't give me advice. They couldn't tell me, I couldn't ask these questions that you all are asking us, like, what do I need to do to get into science policy? How do I make myself more attractive for the AAAS fellowship and things like that? But I like Esteban and Cleo, like it was a mix of, just going out and doing things and getting out of the lab, and then also reaching out to people, that are all like already doing a fellowship or where you want to be in your network that So when I was applying for the AAAS fellowship, I knew 3 people that were currently in the fellowship. And so I reached out to them, and then so I was able to show them my personal statement and all of these things, so, and then they would like bring it back and give me advice and things like that. So they were able to like help me on my application, but independent of that, I was just getting out of the lab, doing my own thing. And one of the things that I did, kind of back to your question earlier, Ben, another thing that I forgot to mention was I was heavily active with our career and professional development office at UCSF. And, they were always running something, doing things. And so I was always like attending those things, just trying to, whether it was related or not to science policy, I was just like really active with, any events that the Career and Professional Development Office was holding. And then I also wanted to mention that, I mean, I'm assuming everyone is at a university right now on, who wants to know more about the fellowship. Your university has a government office, public relations, science, so they have this, I forgot the title, Office of Government Affairs. So they have an Office of Government Affairs. So like, just go to the Office of Government Affairs and say, hey, can I intern here? Can I, how can I be involved in what you do? And that was one of the things that I did as a postdoc. Yeah, government relations or government affairs. Go to that office and find out if you can intern in that office as a student. Find out if you can get involved, and you can possibly find a mentor through that. But yeah, mentorship, it's a weird thing because it's sometimes it's formal, which I find weird when someone's like, hey, this person's going to be your mentor. And then sometimes it's informal because you just know people. And like Esteban said, throughout the years, I've never really utilized a mentor or my network until most recently, until I think the AAAS fellowship is when I started, making those connections, but having a reason to stay connected. So people say, have a network and get mentors, but it's like, what am I supposed to talk to them about? I don't know. It hasn't been until recently that I've had things to go to them about and, talk and, build these relationships and maintain these relationships.
Yeah, I mean, that's it. Yeah, mentorship is it's a thing that you will work for and work towards probably your entire career. I want to briefly circle back to Curtis's audience question about advocacy, and just take a slightly deeper dive into it and what role you think advocacy should play in science policy. And Esteban, I'd like to start with you.
Sure. So like advocacy can mean a lot of things. And in my world, the easiest way to think about it for anyone is like a lobbyist, right? Like that's who they're like trying to change. But you have to remember there's Congress or a legislative body, but you sometimes want to influence executive branch too. Maybe someone wants to push the NIH in a direction or any other branch, and that may or may not involve a lobbyist, but it's still advocacy. So I think it's important. I am not a lobbyist. I do policy, but the work that I do is meant to then translate the policy that I do and make it reality, and then support our folks who are on the ground and talking face to face with folks. So it involves, messaging, writing. It's different than maybe you would put in a policy memo or even in the journal, but it's important. And I think it has a role. Because unfortunately, I think we all are aware that there are many great reports. Like the National Academies puts out so much good stuff. Like just go look at their stuff, and it's just like, why hasn't anyone taken this idea and like implemented it? Because it's science-backed work. And so you have to do the first part of is science-based, thoughtful, critical thinking analysis. But then you need someone to then take it to the finish line and implement it, or else it's just going to be a dusty report. And then someone asks a question, you're like, oh, well, there was a report 10 years ago on it. And you're like, what? Somebody already solved this 10 years ago? So I think it's very important. I think it's important for young folks to understand how to do it, because there's a way to do it poorly and like have the wrong opposite effect of what you want. I think that in general, scientists are a little shy because they want to be impartial. They want, don't want to seem like they're being too political. But at the end of the day, if you want change, you have to advocate for something. So I think it's important in all things.
Yeah, it's important, and it's a kind of an ongoing conversation for the past 5-6 years. It's been an especially ongoing conversation. But I want to begin to wrap up, as I know we're nearing time, and just give everybody a minute or 45 seconds to give us their take-home message on science policy and science policy writing and the role of the fellowship in developing that. So I'd love if we could start with you.
Yeah, I mean, I'll just close by saying, like, one, with listening to Esteban talk about advocacy versus policy, there is a distinction, because advocacy, the word, when you take it to policy, it means more lobbying. But as just the definition of the word of advocacy is like advocating for something, I would say follow your moral compass, so I've been in positions and offices that, irritated my moral compass, and then that's why I'm not there. And then, so I would say, but it was a learning experience because I didn't know, I would be irritated. But I would say, make the science policy what you want it to be. So you don't just have to accept anything because you have a placement or this or that, it's like eventually if you keep going, you will find that place where you want to be. So you may not, get the placement that you want once you join the fellowship, or, there might be this tug and pull, but eventually you'll land in a position that works for you and your personality and where you want to go and where you want to grow.
Yeah, really great thing about being early career is that means so much of your career is ahead of you, and there's so many different placements to try and things to learn about what you actually want. Cleo, final thoughts?
Yeah, I think just don't be afraid to try something new and different, especially if it's like an internship or like term limited fellowship. I think, this might be changing in academia, but for a long time there was the idea, like you can't, get off that train, you have to like keep publishing. But I think now people are appreciating that diverse experiences can bring new ideas and creativity perspectives to research. So even, maybe you try something new and you really like that new direction and you go down that path, or maybe you realize, you want to go back to academia. But either way, I think it's a really valuable experience.
And Esteban?
Yeah, I'll say maybe a couple things. Going back to, I'll reinforce what Ivory said, is like follow your interests, right? Like you might not know what you're doing and you might not even know that it's science policy, but follow your interests. And this was said earlier too, but when you think about writing, and this is so true, whether it's in academia or where I'm at or where the co-panelists are at, it's really know your audience, right? Who are you writing to? Because you are definitely going to write differently depending on who you're writing to. And so I think that's a number one skill to hone. It also holds true for like public speaking as well, but certainly in writing. And I think the journal is a great way to develop those muscles to learn how to write different types of pieces. We've heard today that they have multiple types of writing styles that you can submit to. So I think that'll be my last words on
Great.
the
Yeah, and just to jump on that, I really have enjoyed my time with the journal the entire time as an editor, and I think we get lots of great pieces, and it's a great way to transition into science policy as a PhD student or postdoc. So thank you to Ivory, Cleo, and Esteban. It's been great talking with you. And I'm going to bounce it back to Adriana.
All right, thank you all for your insights today. It was really nice to watch behind the scenes the discussion unfold. I think we could have gone much longer, but really appreciate the discussion, and thanks to all of you for being here and to Ben for moderating. And again, would like to thank STPF for partnering with us on this event and on the standard issue. And I'll share again the call for papers, and we look forward to your submissions at the end of May. Looking forward to seeing what you send us, and reach out to us if you have any questions. And thanks again for joining today, and have a great weekend.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.